One of the requirements to being a normie is to be mathematically illiterate.
How long is a quarter of an hour?
1/4? 1/4?
And I'm not talking about complicated mathematical concepts like Knuth's up arrow notation or first order set theory, nothing that complicated, but simple concepts that are literally needed for you to understand how reality works. There are three big things that normies literally can't wrap their head around, and that is per capita, big numbers, and exponentiation. So let's start off from the top. Now, per capita is something that is totally necessary to kind of understand how different demographics behave, where people stand, right? If you don't understand what per capita is, not only can you not really assess what different demographics in a country are doing, but also you can't really sort out, averages from exceptions very well. Like, it doesn't really process, right? You kind of need to understand what per capita means and go off averages so you can actually, compare like for like. Because otherwise, everything is just like a news headline or, a news story or just something you've seen one time, right? So to really understand how the world works, you absolutely need to have an understanding of what per capita is. I've had so many conversations with people where like it's obvious they're just not thinking in terms of per capita, and we're having like some debate or discussion, and I asked them what per capita is, and like they don't really get it. They can't really repeat actually what it is. And even if you tell them what per capita is and why it's more important to look at per capita numbers as opposed to, total numbers, they will just kind of look at you with like a blank stare. Like, even if you explain it like 100 times, as soon as that conversation is over, they're gonna say, well, I know a tall Chinese guy. Like, it's just gonna go in one ear and out the other. So it's like they just can't wrap their head around this concept of per capita. I'm not sure why. Maybe it requires a bit more of an inner monologue compared to just comparing large number to large number or thing you see to thing you've seen before. But yeah, this is just one of these things that just normies don't get. Another thing that is surprisingly shocking is just how many normies do not know what a billion is. And a billion is like a number that is like, for most people, or I wouldn't say most, but a sizable amount of people, it doesn't actually have an objective meaning. And I know that sounds kind of strange, like you know what a billion is if you're watching this video most likely, but a lot of people literally do not know what a billion is, much less what a trillion or quadrillion is. A lot of people, when they hear the term billion in the context of like economics or whatever, right, that just means uncountably large number, but they don't have like an objective idea of what that is. And this is a bit of a fucking problem. Now, the reason why that's a problem is because if you've ever met one of these kind of, just tax the rich kind of people, right, this type of, this touchy-feely left-wing type of person, I think a big reason this idea of just tax the rich seems quite appealing to them, I think is due to the fact that they don't know large numbers. Because when they think of a billionaire, what they think of is a guy that, just has basically a functionally infinite amount of money, right? And obviously, when we compare it to even larger numbers like national debt and so on, it's absolutely not functionally infinite. In fact, if you were to literally confiscate the wealth of the top 100 wealthiest people in the USA, it would be about like $4 trillion, something like that, right? Now, that sounds like a insane amount of money, but the national debt in the USA is 38 trillion. Like, what's 4 trillion going to do to that? Like, what problem is that really going to solve? $4 trillion is like last year's national debt in the USA. It's just nothing. It's just nothing. It's obviously not going to solve anything, right? Never mind the fact that, a lot of assets of billionaires are not liquid. It's not literally just a pile of money that they have. It's like, stocks and assets and real estate that is subject to market fluctuations. And that's another thing that normies don't get. That could be like a number 2.5 on this list, is not knowing what liquidity is, right? But I don't really want to get lost in the weeds on market liquidity. But needless to say, it's not like they literally have like piles of cash. If we did just literally just confiscate, the top 100 wealthiest people's assets, this is going to create a chilling effect. So like, nobody that is amassing any amount of serious money is going to stay in this country. They're just going to leave, right? So, it's going to cause major fucking problems. That's like just you know, blowing your wad there and there, it's gonna what, pay for like government spending for like a fucking year? Like, that's nothing. That's nothing. But like, if you're mathematically illiterate, you know, just tax the rich seems like you know, it seems quite sensible. It seems quite intuitive, right? Like, you know, you've got an uncountably large amount of money, so let's just take some of that, right? Like, it's kind of like, it's simple, right? But that's the problem. It's simple. It's not looking at objective numbers. And by the way, I don't like billionaires. Like, the vast majority of billionaires would throw me under the bus the second it's convenient. I have no allegiance to billionaires at all. Like, I don't like these people. Like, I don't like Warren Buffett. I don't like Mark Zuckerberg. You know, these people, you know, have no allegiance to me, so I don't have any allegiance to them. But like, let's just talk realistically, yeah. Even if you just take their money, like, it's not gonna do shit. It's not gonna do shit. The problems we have are way beyond a quick fix like just tax the rich. It's just so monumental, the problems that we have, that, you know, this just isn't going to solve the issue, right? But again, to understand that, you kind of need to know what a billion is and what a trillion is, right? Like, if you don't, then what I'm saying just sounds like I'm being mean, right? And number 3 on this list is exponentiation, or the idea of something being exponential. Seems to just elude a lot of normies. Now, this is a relevant concept that has a lot of people really overlook how bad inflation is. Because if you look at like inflation, right, you know, it's like what, 3-4%, 5%, well, whatever. Like, we're not in the pandemic anymore, but to a normie, this just doesn't seem like a big deal, right? What they don't understand is that 3-4-5% is compounding. It's compounding. So it means it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Like that, the amount of inflation, right? And because the inflation number is presented in just this like yearly like slice, it's like 4% a year or whatever, right? But it doesn't seem that bad. But it's 4% on 4% from last year, 4% from the year before that. So it's actually a huge amount of inflation. It's not just like the small number. And this is what like a exponential curve looks like, right? Something that a lot of people just don't get. Like, a lot of people like to think on terms of like, you know, linear growth or linear decline, but they don't really get exponential growth or exponential decline, right? But that's like something you need to have an understanding of just to understand how the world works. It's also why a lot of like the, you know, the wealthiest entities on the planet have so much fucking money. It's because they have like an edge in the market, entering and exiting, you know, financial positions. The thing is, right, if you make a 5% trade, you know, you've made like $500, right? I guess that's good profit. But here's the thing. If Warren Buffett makes the same trade, you know, taking liquidity out of the mix, right, he's made $5 billion. So it's a, you know, the same trade is being done, right? But like one entity is just making orders of magnitude more money than the other guy making the same trade. So once you have like an edge in the market, you kind of have like this exponential increase in the amount of wealth that you have. And there is like a few like glass ceilings, you know, in this stage, but I don't really want to bore you with. But basically, like, if you zoom out and look at like the overall like trend, you know, if you have like an edge in the market, you can just, you know, basically, you know, just grow exponentially. And, you know, you get to this point where you've kind of reached this escape velocity where you have so much fucking wealth that you have so much money that you just splurge out on things that isn't obviously beneficial to you, right? A good example of this is BlackRock, right? They've made so much fucking money, but they kind of don't even know what to do with their money. Because they're at like the, you know, the straight line part of their exponential increase in wealth, right? They have so much fucking money that they're just like giving out a few million to people, to a few companies that say things they like, right? Literally, like that's how much money they have. They have so much wealth. The exponential nature of money, I think, really eludes people. I think really, you know, a lot of people just can't really grasp it. Well, guys, hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please drop a like and subscribe for more.